In the early centuries after the life of Jesus, the gospel exploded in popularity. One of the major reasons for this gospel growth was because of who was joining. The Church of Jesus was full of beggars, widows, and orphans.
The Greek philosopher Celsus even mocked the growing movement, stating, "Far from us, say the Christians, be any man possessed of any culture or wisdom or judgment. Their aim is to convince only worthless and contemptible people, idiots, slaves, poor women, and children. These are the only ones who they manage to turn into believers."
Over the last few episodes, we have examined many different aspects of friendship. As a quick reminder, we define friendship as a state of enduring affection, esteem, intimacy, and trust between two people. This definition is helpful for us to have an overarching view of friendship, but definitions can only take us so far. Sometimes it's helpful to have practical examples. With that in mind, turn to the people around you and share a time when you had a friend be there for you in a practical way.
If we return to our friend Celsus, his mocking of the early Christians for being friends with idiots, slaves, poor women, and children comes across as kind of funny, because Celsus didn't quite realize that this was a feature of the church, not a bug. But even if his wires were crossed, Celsus was noticing that Christians were welcoming and befriending people who weren't normally celebrated. These weren't the sorts of people you would choose to make friends with if your primary goal was just to increase your own social status.
In fact, the pagans around the church were remarking on how well Christians loved each other. To put it bluntly, Christians were friends with people no one wanted to be friends with, and they were such good friends with them that people were starting to take notice.
This was the defining characteristic of Christians in the early church. Jesus even said this would happen. "By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." We'll come back to that verse a little later, but it's interesting to note that if you were to ask someone what Christians are known for today, chances are low they'd immediately say how much they love each other. They might say Christians are known more for what they're against.
Hello, I'm Mark Applebottom, and welcome to the first episode of Christianity 101. Today we'll be answering the question, how do I talk like a Christian? In the world of Christianity, there are many phrases and words that are used. But then there's an even bigger list of words and phrases that we cannot use. A woman approaches you and says, "Freeze, say a curse word or I will shoot you." You can simply respond with, "No thank you, sister. In fact, here's my wallet and a card with all my church service times on it." Haha, outstanding. Here's one last example. "Hello, I would like you to join me in a prolonged frontal hug." Your response is simply, "Here's an idea. How about a firm handshake? And then maybe we can discuss our feelings over a warm glass of milk." Well done.
Now, it can be amusing to poke fun at ourselves in modern times, but we really do have much to learn from the early church when it comes to friendship. As Francis Chan puts it, one thing the New Testament makes clear is that the church is supposed to be known for its love. Jesus says our love for one another is the very thing that will attract the world. But can you name a single church in our country that is known for the way its members love one another? I'm sure you can think of churches known for excitement or powerful preaching or worship or production value. But can you name a church known for supernatural love?
What does he mean by supernatural love? If you remember in our second episode, we spent some time defining different types of love. We talked about the 4 Greek loves: eros, storge, philia, and agape. 3 of these 4 focus primarily on human loves. We could even call them natural loves, but agape is more supernatural. It specifically focuses on God's love for humans.
Agape love has a unique quality. It is unconditional. In fact, the Hebrew word chesed we talked about earlier also suggests this same idea. God's love is unconditional and loyal. This love is a foundational part of who God is.
In the Bible, God is loyal and loving for no other reason than it's just who God is. Of course, he wants his people to respond with chesed in return, but even when they don't, God's chesed remains. The prophet Hosea compared Israel's chesed to a morning mist that's here one moment and gone the next. But God's chesed is enduring. Like in the celebration of Psalm 136 that opens by saying, "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good," and then 26 times repeats, "His chesed is forever."
We've talked about Genesis and how God said it was not good for man to be alone. But that's only a part of the story. The relationship between man and God was fractured when Adam and Eve chose to reject God's design and chase after their own. But God still desired a relationship with his creation. It's maybe oversimplifying things, but the rest of the story of the Bible and of humanity is God working to restore and repair the friendship between him and humanity.
And it's a pretty one-sided attempt. Humanity's efforts usually result in us furthering the divide, but God's faithful love, like we heard in Psalm 136, endures forever. This is where Jesus arrives. Jesus represents the very height of love, of friendship, in all of history. His very existence, his birth and death and resurrection is the outpouring of God's love for us.
Remember how Jesus said that the greatest love is to lay down your life for a friend? Well, Jesus went even further. The God of the universe stepped down from heaven, wrapped himself in the flesh of his creation, and walked among us. His feet grew dirty, his hair needed cutting, he felt pain and sorrow and joy and wonder. The infinite had become finite. The infallible had become fallible.
God, who humanity had betrayed time and time again. God who could rightfully call us his enemies. God who could have abandoned us in our darkness decided to repair the divide by offering his only son. Jesus became the greatest form of love by not only laying down his life for his friends, but also for his enemies.
The Apostle Paul unpacks it like this: "For while we were still weak, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. But God shows his love for us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son, much more, now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life."
We see Christ's humble love clearly in John 13. It's hours before Jesus is turned over to the authorities to be crucified. In his last moments, instead of rallying his followers to save him or trying to experience as much joy and pleasure as he can, Jesus kneels down before his disciples and washes their feet. The God of the universe knelt down on the floor, taking the role of the lowliest servant, and served his friends. He concludes the moment by stating this: "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another."
To conclude, we need to ask what this means practically for us today. It's apparent Jesus desires for his followers to love one another, and for this love to reflect his love for us. But how do we do this? Well, first, it's important to note that the New Testament promotes a selfless, unconditional love. But Jesus is not asking us to remain in dangerous relationships or abusive friendships.
We still live in the reality of Adam and Eve's decision to turn away from God. And many of our friendships will be broken and the love will be far from perfect. But we also believe Jesus is in the business of redeeming and restoring us and our friendships. The love Jesus asks us to embrace is a sacrificial love, where we become the type of friends who put the needs of others before our own, where our friendship unifies us with one another and the will of Jesus.
We'll leave you with Paul's exhortation to the Philippians. So if there's any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others.